Well, thank you all, and what a great crowd. It's great to be here and all, and looking forward to presenting to you all and talking as well. So, um, yeah, so I'm going to cover a kind of a diversity of things. I think I'm going to be able to sort of tie it all together and have it make sense. Um, but some of those themes are the diversity of plant life in the Southeast US and why we have such diversity, the time and the history behind that. I'm going to talk about the coastal plain and the East Gulf coastal plain, the Florida Panhandle, and the Apalachicola immediate area. And then I'm going to sort of move into talking about the Southeastern Flora Project, our process in naming new species of plants in the Southeast. And I'm also going to get a little bit philosophical about sort of learning to see the green world around us, new tools, old floras, and how we can improve on old floras as much as many of us love them. Some of us also kind of hate them. And then all this is going to have a theme sort of running all through it of conserving the real world, the natural world around us. So for those of you who are not so much plant people, I kind of apologize. I'm going to really focus mostly on plants, but there will be a few token mentions of other organisms. It's not that I don't love them, but I will focus on plants. So when we look at a map of plant species diversity for the lower 48 states, it looks something like this. This is one portrayal from the North American program. And you may notice this sort of big dark blue blob in the Florida Panhandle that is really only challenged by some blobs out there in California, out on the left coast. When we look at plant family diversity, the picture changes in kind of a really interesting way. We sort of jump up an order in taxonomy, a rank in taxonomy, a couple ranks in taxonomy. You'll see that the Southeast is really dominant when we jump up to that level. And what is that telling us? It's really telling us that the Southeast is very old. Southeast has developed and then been able to retain very high diversity at a kind of coarser level. So we have more plant families. California may have more species, but damn it, we have more families. Let's just right out and say it, okay? Sort of interesting is also this map of tree diversity. We always hear about how the Smokies have the highest number of trees. Well, it's really the Red Hills of Alabama, little known fact, and Florida Panhandle. So when we look at state floras in the southeastern United States, the number of species of native species, Florida is up there near the top. Georgia actually a little bit higher, Alabama and North Carolina behind. Here is one of those token mentions of other organisms, the southeastern US. This is for you, Bruce. The southeastern US is also rich in many other organism groups. So it's not all plants all the time. It's not just plants, it's overall biodiversity. And I like to sort of describe the reason why the Southeast has such high diversity in the old earth, air, fire, and water paradigm. So earth physiography, you can see the complexity of the southeastern United States with the different bands of mountain ranges. The coastal plain here looks sort of boring, but of course really isn't. Elevation, in part a surrogate for temperature, the southeastern US has some diversity. In the coastal plain, topography and microtopography are of tremendous significance. Just a few inches can change the community and change the set of species that you find. This is a picture from North Carolina with a sandhills community on the left and a streamhead pocosin on the right. Shift from longleaf pine to the left to pond pine to the right. and a rich herbaceous diversity on the left to a rich shrub diversity on the right. Precipitation, we don't have a lot of variation in the southeast, but some. And then there is that factor fire, which is important all across the southeast, but of course is a paramount factor in shaping the diversity of the coastal plain. Fire frequency, the intensity with which it burns, which are obviously correlated, and so forth. And the high fire frequency has some anthropogenic relationships with Native American burning and so forth, but also simply high flash density, high lightning frequency. The darker the red, the higher the flash density. And so you can see very broadly across the southeast a lot of opportunity for natural fires to be set. And we shouldn't overlook as a factor this week of any week the hurricane disturbances that the Southeast experiences. These are the named hurricanes only in the year 2020, which was a quite robust year for hurricanes, but you can see many of those hurricanes transecting the Southeast. And then there's time, and I deliberately chose this sort of crazy clock because the effects of time are complex and really quite difficult for us to fully appreciate and understand. We, with our short time spans, I think we can't really imagine all of the time that has shaped the flora and fauna of the Southeast. The coastal plain began forming in the Cretaceous. The coastal plain has been around for 75 million years. We'll come back around to that a little bit further. So all these different factors mean that sort of every point in the Southeast is its own different crazy quilt patch with a different set of conditions. And that sort of crazy quilt has meant that there's been the opportunity for a tremendous amount of biodiversity to be retained in this little patch or that little patch or this little place or this little area. When organizations like NatureServe put together maps of biodiversity using different methodologies, they all pretty much come out looking something like this. There's a lot of very high biodiversity in the east, in the Appalachian Mountains, in southeastern North Carolina, in the Florida Peninsula, particularly the Central Ridge and the Miami Rock Ridge, the Florida Panhandle, and a little bit adjacent Alabama and Georgia, and then some other areas that show up on the next map that I'll show a little bit better. This is a map with somewhat different methodology. And the green areas that are overlaid here are protected areas defined pretty strictly. So for instance, the Apalachicola National Forest doesn't count as protected on this map because it is multiple use management. And also they're fairly strict on their determination of what counts as protected area. But basically, dark red represents to put it positively, biodiversity conservation opportunity. To put it negatively, it represents we haven't gotten the job done. We have a lot of biodiversity hanging out there, with a considerable degree of endangerment. And when we focus in here on the deeper southeast quadrant, you can really see that. So what is perhaps darkest red of all, the Florida Panhandle, and particularly the area right immediately in the 6 or 7 counties right around us here. Reed Noss and a number of collaborators, several of whom are in this room, Bill Platt, Bruce Means, are with us here this evening as well. About 10 years ago, put together a paper about how global biodiversity hotspots may go unrecognized And we basically made the case for considering the southeastern coastal plain the 36th global biodiversity hotspot. Now, it sounds cool to be, so to speak, to be a hotspot. Sounds like a good thing, right? But the methodology for determining a hotspot is sort of a good news, bad news situation. You get to be a hotspot by having really high biodiversity, really unique biodiversity, high endemism, but also by having bad protection, by having a lot of loss of land, a lot of conversion of land and so forth. So one of the 36 hotspots, the southeastern coastal plain is one of them. The Amazon is not. You're like, what? The Amazon is in relatively better shape than the southeastern coastal plain. It's sort of a shocking idea, I guess. So it's with some, I don't know, embarrassment or nervousness that I come here to the Florida Panhandle and tell you all what a special place the Florida Panhandle is, but maybe it means something to hear it from an outsider, as it were. The Florida Panhandle is really, there's all this remarkable biodiversity across the southeastern United States, but the Florida Panhandle is more remarkable than almost anywhere else. It has such tight endemics, such unique things. There's really nowhere that really quite rivals it. About 20 years ago, Bruce Sorey and I, looking at plant distributions in the Southeast, did a paper in which we looked at the distribution of endemic plants in the southeastern coastal plain, the overall coastal plain sort of shown there. And we delineated 27, I think it was, different endemism patterns. And this is just one of the figures from that paper that shows 10, 11, 12, and 13 as we memorably named them, right? So many of them actually overlap here in the Panhandle. So you can see that pattern here as well. We also looked in a different paper at all of the vascular plant species endemic to the longleaf pine ecosystem. And that's right about 1,000 species that basically only occur in the longleaf pine ecosystem. And we were interested in the way those were distributed within that ecosystem. Could you protect the ecosystem by doing a really great job of protecting longleaf pine in North Carolina and not worry about the rest of it? Could you do a great job of protecting longleaf pine in East Texas and not worry about the rest of it? And I think most of you all have a sense of what the answer was. No, not at all, because there are many species that occur quite broadly across the coastal plain, might even have essentially the entire distribution, from southeastern Virginia in longleaf down the Florida Peninsula and to East Texas. But many, many species only occur in one portion of that distribution, some with very narrow ranges. So you not only have very high diversity in any one given place, but you also have very high turnover of that diversity as you move through the region. So the East Gulf Coastal Plain comes out richest of all with 125 endemics, the Florida Peninsula with 122 that are just endemic to those two smallish areas. The Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic, and West Gulf Coastal Plains come out lower. So another sort of remarkable thing is that the Panhandle has almost every one of the habitats, broadly defined habitats that you find here in the Panhandle has notable endemism. And this is a very, very, very partial list, just with a few species for each habitat, but slope forests or steep heads, sand hills, pine flatwoods, seepage slopes, coastal dune systems, isolated depressional wetlands, bottomland forests, upland glades. They've all got endemics. And I think that's a really interesting thing. It suggests that it's not something particular about any one habitat, that makes for all this endemism in the Florida Panhandle. There is something about geographically about the area. And I think it's kind of a profound thing. As we ponder conservation in an age of global change, lots of people are out there trying to model resiliency. Oh, where is there going to be resiliency? And they often model resiliency based on things like there are elevational gradients. As conditions get hotter, the plants and animals can run up the slope. If it gets even hotter, they can run up the slope a little further. So the more slopey you are, the better. They model it on the basis of geologic diversity. Oh, there's mafic rock here and acid rock there, and things can move back and forth between the two of them. What's the coastal plain look like on that? It's all a bunch of damn sand. Not really, but you know, the geologic diversity doesn't seem very high. The topographic diversity certainly isn't high. And so the coastal plain gets dissed. The coastal plain gets no respect. The coastal plain gets modeled as not having resiliency. But I would submit to you that, you know, look at how the coastal plain has done historically for the last 60 million years. It's done pretty damn well. It has managed to generate a tremendous amount of biodiversity, more than the inland provinces, more than the Appalachians, et cetera. And it has also been able to retain that diversity through millions and millions of years. That suggests that the coastal plain has a resiliency that we underappreciate with how we model that. So, what is going on with that? Why does that happen? So, Harperocalis. Harperocalis for decades was considered, go away. Was considered to be a monotypic genus only occurring here on the Apalachicola National Forest. It has since been combined with another genus, and there are 11 species of Harperocalis, 10 of which are down in the Andes and the Guiana Shield parts of Venezuela, northern Brazil, etc. And you look at a distribution like this and you say, that's a really strange distribution. How did Harperocalis flava end up in Florida, right? But if you look at Sarracenia as well, the closest related genus to Sarracenia is Helianthera, endemic in that same area of South America. So there are biogeographic things and connections going on that we underappreciate when we think about the coastal plain as damp, flat, vermin infested, et cetera. And I'm going to suggest the idea, this is sort of an idea that has come on over the last 10 years or so, of aukbills. How many of you have heard of aukbills and yodfils? See a few hands going up. So aukbills are old, climatically buffered, infertile landscapes, and yodfils are young, often disturbed, fertile landscapes. And aukbills have been found around the world to develop and retain a tremendous amount of endemism and biodiversity. Examples of aukbills are the southern tip of Africa, the really unique ecosystems there in South Africa, the Guiana Shield, Tepuis and Gran Sabana area in Venezuela, and others. So the idea has just sort of recently come up that, well, gosh, you know, areas like the Florida Panhandle, kind of paradoxically, as I said, they're actually old. They are climatically buffered, even during past ice age events and so forth. Much the same vegetation occurred in this area and on the continental shelf. They are mostly infertile, et cetera, and they have this pattern of high endemism and all.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just talk briefly about recent description of species. So 78 species of Florida plants have been named since the year 2000. 33 of those in the Panhandle. That surprises a lot of people. A lot of people think, well, golly, Western science has been looking at plants of Eastern North America for 500 years now. Haven't we got it figured out by now? So, where do we find new species? We go to Borneo, or we go to Papua New Guinea, or the jungles of Brazil, or something like that. That's where where we ought to be finding new species. But we're actually finding new species at a very considerable rate here in the Southeast, not just in the coastal plain and not just in Florida, all over the region, really. And most of the ones that we are finding are narrow endemics with relatively high degrees of imperilment. And it makes some sense if you really think about it. A lot of the specialized habitats, many of them weren't very accessible until the last 50 or 100 years. Many habitats weren't really even discovered. There aren't very many botanists. Botanists are thin on the ground. We're not everywhere. And also we're still really just doing the alpha taxonomy on finding these things. We also do have new techniques and approaches to defining species, and applying those makes some difference as well. But we're also going through a process of resurrecting past deprecated species, many of which were named, based on just morphology. And when we get around to doing the more sophisticated DNA analysis and so forth, many of these things pop out as, well, golly, those old guys, J.K. Small back in 1933 wasn't so stupid after all. He had that one right. Some things are coming back out of synonymy. So some examples of Panhandle newly named. I don't know whether many of these will be familiar to people. I'm not going to really talk about each of these, but you can look down through the list. Coreopsis bakeri, named for Wilson Baker, who's also here in the audience. Lytris golsonii, other honorifics. One that was just named this past year by a student of mine, Kevin McClellan, is Trichostoma latens. It's from two known populations in scrubby flatwoods between Caravel and St. Teresa. I'm just sort of scratching my head a little bit and wondering how it is. It's probably been through serious hurricanes before, so hopefully it's still there. So why and how are we still finding these new species? We're looking more carefully at kind of details of habitat, odd habitats that we hadn't appreciated before. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides that relate to this. And to set that up, I want to just mention species naming. So a plant species gets named, it gets essentially a born-on date that can't be earlier than 1753. Sometimes the names are changed later, they're moved to a different genus or whatever, but the born-on date remains. When was that species first recognized as different than anything else? And if we map that by time here, from 1750 to nearly the present, and by imperilment, if G1 through G5, the G5 basically are common widespread species, G3 are uncommon, pretty narrowly distributed, maybe without really serious threats, and G2 and G1 species are the ones that may only have 5 or 10 or 15 populations and are also subjected to threats. We can see this pattern where the botanists back in the 1750s and 800s, they found most of the common stuff. Makes sense, right? They're not going to walk past white oak and tulip tree and longleaf pine and all that. But look at the bulk of the G1 and G2 species named after 1900. Many of them still in the process of being named. And this is another way to portray that same thing with the G ranks from G1 highly imperiled to G5 up the axis here on the left and 1750 to 2020 going out this way. So you can see the sort of clear pattern of we're finding the rarer species now. Okay, so I want to finish up by talking about the Southeastern Flora Project. And this is a project that I've led for about 30 years now. And the effort is to basically create and maintain a new flora for the Southeastern US that documents all this plant diversity, that provides people with the tools to identify it and so forth. And my approach has been that we have to reinvent how we do floras. Floras as big fat tomes that get written and then sit in an herbarium for 50 years and maybe eventually get revised is not very in tune with the crisis of biodiversity that we're dealing with the ways we consume information nowadays, with our need to keep up with changes in taxonomy and have that reflected and served to people. So we're working on this broad Southeastern flora, sort of the unglaciated southeast west to what I call the dry line, where trees sort of peter out in Texas and Oklahoma. And that's about 11,000 total species, 7,000 natives, 500 that we're not really sure whether they're native or not, and 3,500 non-natives. So a third of the flora essentially is now non-native. So it's not your grandparents' taxonomy. It's not your grandparents' set of plants in the area. We have all these invasives that weren't here 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100. It's not your grandparents' flora, a book. Not really your grandparents' keys and methods of ID. It's not your grandparents' audience for biodiversity information. Floras were sort of famously written by PhD botanists for PhD botanists. And I think we need to do better in an era where conservation is really a major focus. So on the upper right there, Roland Harper, on the lower right, J.K. Small, and on the lower left, E. Lucy Braun from Kentucky. And Al Radford in the pith helmet on the left there, my mentor at UNC, with a bunch of happy and smiling students, it looks like, all pressing plants in the field. So floras and other flora tools and formats are basically how information on taxonomy and habitats and so forth gets synthesized and put in the hands of people who need or want to use it. Farmers, ranchers, weed scientists, foresters, private landowners, NGOs, agencies. The Southeast has historically had pretty poor coverage of floras. The last regional flora being J.K. Smalls in 1933. Many states like Mississippi have never had a state flora and all. So we need to put the hay where the horses can get it. So do the plants in a region change? I think we've already kind of covered this. I'll not spend a lot of time about it, but we describe new species. We lump, we split. We move things around in genera. New native species that have always been here get found that hadn't been seen before. And of course, new alien species are introduced and naturalized. So we continue to name new species at a pretty good clip. If anything, going up rather than down. We're not asymptoting to we know everything. Sometimes people say, well, all this, all the naming these new species and so forth, does it all matter for conservation anyway? And I'll use this as a quick example. This isn't in the coastal plain, but Wes Knapp, Derek Poindexter, and I over the last 10 years sort of figured out that we had a couple of extra Marshallia species that hadn't been recognized before. And one of those, Marshallia legrandii, we named up, and it's a two-site endemic. It has two known populations in the world, and a large tract of land with that plant, 7,000 acre single ownership, came up for sale in Virginia. And I wrote an email to a conservation philanthropist and said I thought this was an important area to be conserved. And by 2 weeks later, he had purchased it for $15 million and then donated it to the state of Virginia for long-term conservation as an additional natural area. So conservation does matter. It's also a very beautiful wildflower. We grow it at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And here's the news story about the largest private land donation in Virginia history being made, Falkland Farms for permanent conservation. So floras, the Flora of Virginia, 1761 and 2011. Yes, it weighs 6.388 pounds. Not very many people carry it out in the field. What we all kind of want, right, is Spock's tricorder. We want to have this device which will identify everything for us, tell us whether it's intelligent or not, and all. And we're not there. So tools to learn the plants around you. You can have an expert show you. You can use iNaturalist or other AI-based apps. You can use wildflower guides, or you can use floras. I think a really important thing, I love the apps. I use iNaturalist myself regularly. I think it can be a gateway drug to biodiversity appreciation and natural history interest. I think it also can be not a very good learning tool. You know, you sort of get an answer and you probably accept the answer, whether it's right or wrong. You maybe don't learn further how to identify that plant because the next time you're also just going to use the AI on it the next time you see it. So you're never going to actually learn how to ID that plant. So in a world in which many of us, most of us, spend a lot of our time looking at our little screens, and maybe particularly our children spend a lot of time looking at screens, I think we have to worry about sort of losing contact with the green world around us, or only seeing a green wall as we drive by, or only seeing parking lots and civilized land. So wild plants to the people. Let's see what we can do here. So reinventing the flora as a 21st century tool for biodiversity inventory. So we're trying to do a lot of things here, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit of detail. We're trying to do the hard work so you won't have to. Well, we're really trying to just give you better tools to make your hard work more effective, efficient, and fun. But the rest of the goal, you know, Newt Scamander is a magizoologist, right? So we need more magibotanists and plant wizards and data mages and natural lands managers, biodiversity explorers, phytophilo philosophers, conservation persuaders, etc. And down at the bottom there, just plain folks who care. You know, a conservation constituency. We need the public to be with us in the goal of conserving. So I already made my comment about iNaturalist. So the Flora of the Southeast project is collaborative. We have probably maybe more than 1,000 individuals who've contributed. Open access, scientifically rigorous, kept current and up to date, supported by diverse funding, private NGO, state and federal. Some of that funding is from that conservation philanthropist who I mentioned before. Our core team is me and these four: Chris Ludwig on the upper left there, Katie Gibson, who is an app designer out in Bozeman, Montana, Scott Ward, who some of you Floridians know, in the lower right, and in the lower center, Michael Lee, who is a data scientist. So 3 botanists out of 5. Which gets, you know, us to that redesigning floras and putting them together in different ways. But we interact a lot with all the heritage programs across the region and other botanists around the region. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. So I'm going to keep going a little faster because I want to get to the meat of this. So the flora of the southeastern US is really a digital flora. We produce it out of a database and we produce it in multiple platforms and forms. And it's sort of the same information, but those different platforms and different forms handle some things better than others or don't handle things at all. So on the left here is the PDF version of the flora. So this is for your old-fashioned person who wants a paper copy or wants something where you turn pages essentially, right? There are disadvantages to that. These other two things that I'm about to show you each have over 30,000 photographs of the plants associated with them. You can't put 30,000 photographs into a PDF or paper format and have it useful. But the hay where all the horses can get it. So in the center, there is a website and a web app. It's configured in a way that it shows up nicely on a phone as well as on a laptop or computer at home, etc. So it can have the photos and so forth. It doesn't have all the features of the installable app that I'll talk about in a minute, but it does have a lot of digital features. One disadvantage is of course of that is if you're out in the middle of Apalachicola National Forest, are you going to be able to use it? No, probably not. And then on the right is the installable apps that we're producing in Apple and Google operating systems. So all this is based on managing the flora as a database rather than typing a flora, word processing a flora and going in and editing it. Everything comes out of the database. So this is the more complicated file structure that enables us to do these sorts of things. So books and PDFs, web app, installable apps, also Wildflower Guide from the same database. And here's the Wildflower Guide. So some of the other things about reinventing the flora are putting new information into it. Conservation status like G ranks and S ranks, wetland rankings, coefficients of conservatism like that lead to SQI calculations, heliophily index, what is the fidelity of species to open sites, invasiveness of non-native taxa. These are all things that are not traditionally part of floras. We can also insert custom information for florulets done for a particular small area. We can do a lot with synonymy and tying all this into existing floras and monographic work. We can produce flexifloras and florulets and things for any sort of a state park. If you have a species list, we can basically use that species list and produce a flora for that list of species. So if you had a list of the flora of the plants known from the Apalachicola National Forest, we could basically produce a flora with keys, and the keys would auto simplify down to only keying the species in that list. Okay, all the unneeded key leads would be dropped out. We could insert pictures and line drawings. We could put in custom information related to its distribution on Apalachicola National Forest. So for the Magnolia of the Southeast, this is what the key looks like. If you do that auto simplification for Southern Ohio or Eastern Texas, that's what the keys look like. So you get rid of the stuff that you're not going to find in those geographic areas. We do, though, include dichotomous directed keys. Those traditional keys are still, in many cases, the best ways to identify plants. But we also have created multiple access keys, polyclave or graphic or undirected keys in the digital formats of the flora. So these are based on a database with 268,000 character state values. And basically you can, rather than being led through an A versus B choice, and then another A versus B choice, and then another A versus B choice, the polyclave approach basically has a series of questions that you can answer in any order. And if you don't have the answer to any of those questions, it doesn't matter. You just skip it. You don't you're not then stuck at that point like you are in a dichotomous key. And each time you enter in a piece of information, your phone or tablet or whatever is basically subsetting using that database and saying, okay, it can't be those things, can't be those things, can't be those things, until you get it down to an answer. So we have 33,333 photos in the Carolinas and Georgia version of the app. The Florida version will be coming out in a few months. It'll have similar number of photos and then we'll move west through the Gulf Coast states out to Texas and Oklahoma with our final 2 apps. We have 2 out and 3 to go. Florida's third. So we're beginning to add in diagnostic photos into dichotomous keys. Oh golly, a picture really is worth 1,000 words sometimes, right? Trying to read through that and figure out the terminology. If sometimes a photo will just clarify that incredibly. So you have the option of using dichotomous keys or the graphic keys. And if you use the graphic key down to a set of 10 or fewer things, then you can push a button and get an on-the-fly dichotomous key or decision tree that will help you identify within those 10 or fewer. So an example of using the graphic key would be you enter easily observable information. You're in unglaciated montane, Pennsylvania. So your phone is you can record, have that automatically set from your location. You have a woody plant growing in a wet place, broadleaf woody plant. It's a shrub, not a tree. The leaves are opposite. The leaves are compound. You've gone from 11,000 possibilities to 2 just by answering those simple questions. That's kind of a best case scenario. It doesn't always go quite that easily. So to go through this example, some of you may recognize this as Silene virginica. So graphic key, begin by pressing the highlighted area on the bottom there. That's the graphic key button. Begin. It's not a fern or a fern ally. It's not a grass-like plant. You end up deciding it's a dicot wildflower. And there's support information to help you make that decision. Other dicots. And you're down to 2,272. You select your location, North Carolina, Piedmont. You're down to 1,196. You select that it's a dry, sunny place, down to 880. You select that it's flowering in May, 723. That it is an erect habit, 594. That it has short, soft hairs, 428. Leaf arrangement opposite, 169. Leaf simple, 164. Leaf shape narrow, and you can always hit the question mark and get definitions and help in making these decisions. Flower symmetry regular, 50 or 70. Flower color red, 9. You can then tap show and look through the things, and doesn't really look like a euphorbia, doesn't look like corncockle. You might think it looks like Silene virginica. You can list that in different orders, the possible selections. And once you think you have an answer, you can do the old classic thing of reading through the description and confirming that it really looks plausible. Look at other photos, it looks good, etc. So, yeah. All right. How much time do I still have left? Well, I wouldn't say that. Okay, I'll try to finish up in about 10 more minutes. So dichotomous keys. We also have sort of a philosophy that I want to go into, and I think you'll find some of this kind of funny. How many of you all have used dichotomous keys? How many of you all love dichotomous keys? How many of you all hate dichotomous keys? Proofs. Okay. All right. So be defiant against the saying keys are written by those who don't need them for those who won't be able to use them. Right? Design keys to work throughout the growing season, relying only as necessary and as late in the key as possible on transitory characters of flower and fruit. Minimize unnecessary technical language that acts as a barrier to proto-botanists. Don't use terms like follicular for grooved, or porrect for at a right angle, or persicicolor for peach colored. Okay. In other words, let's try to write a flora by field botanists for field botanists. So I came up with these 22 antitheses of flora writing. So keys are written by those who don't need them, the expert on a genus for those who won't be able to use them. Let's not do that. Floras are bound books. They should be as heavy as possible and made with weak bindings. They belong on a table in an herbarium, not in the field. 3, digital products are not real. 4, floras should be written once and not revised. Knowledge is eternal. Did Moses need to go back to the mountain for a new set of stone tablets? 5, floras should be written as dryly as possible. If any touch of humanity or humor appears or love of plants, it degrades the science. 6, no pictures. There's nothing worth showing that can't be described in a minimum of 30 highly technical words. 7, keep habitat descriptions as general and vague as possible. Woods, roadsides. That way you won't ever be wrong. 8, make sure to use Latinate words that show you are a well-trained botanist. If a sepal is dark, call it fuscus. If it's grooved, call it follicular or canaliculated. Glossaries of technical terms should have no pictures. Make definitions technical and circular by reference. Follicular, characterized by having a follicula. If two genera look superficially similar and are often mistaken for one another, make sure they are keyed far apart from one another. 11, start keys with the most technical characters possible, then proceed to more obvious, readily observable characters. 12, in keys, never use vegetative characters that are apparent throughout the growing season when you can and should rely on features of the ephemeral flowers or of the fruits that never set. Plants in sterile condition were never meant to be ID'd. That's actually a stated principle in writing botanical manuals. You're not really supposed to identify anything that isn't in fruit. 13, in keys, use terms with general meanings, bracts, without explaining their specialized meaning in that genus. Bracts absent. How do I know that they're absent if I don't know what I'm looking for? 14, in keys, use relative terms based on your own extensive experience. Plants large and coarse versus plants smaller and more gracile. How much smaller and what does gracile mean? Perhaps the user will eventually acquire that same experience. 15, in keys, use characters that depend on the plant having been dried as an herbarium specimen, leaves blackening on drying. 16, in keys, never use characters that are most apparent when the plant is fresh. Plants should only be ID'd from specimens in an herbarium. In keys, use words ambiguously. Sepals reddish brown versus sepals mostly greenish. What does that mostly mean? That most of the sepal is greenish, or that in most of the species that are keyed there, the sepals are greenish, but some of the species have sepals that are reddish brown or maybe flaming hot pink? Write family keys using technical and obscure characters, placentation axile versus placentation parietal, often intruded. Follow a strict procedure of key to family, key to genus, key to species, key to infraspecies. If someone can't key a plant to the family, see number 18, they don't deserve to know. 20, early in a key, use characters requiring mature fruits. Later in the key, use characters requiring newly opened flowers. No pain, no gain. The most common species in a state, crops like wheat, corn, and soybeans, should be excluded from floras. That's intuitive, right? Keep the riffraff out of botany. No PhD, then why do you think you can use a flora? So we are trying to move away from all of that. And it's a somewhat slow and gradual process because I'm going to let you in on a secret. Most keys are written by cribbing from somebody else's keys, right? Bob Godfrey, Florida State, Tallahassee, et cetera, was great. He almost always wrote his own key based on his own experience and looking at material in the field and in the herbarium. And also Bob's keys are often very, very good. But when you crib from other people, you often end up with sort of these some of these principles getting carried on from the past. So we're trying to get rid of them. Sometimes use pictures. So Gymnocarpium appalachianum versus Gymnocarpium diopterus. This is a key lead to those. Sessile basal basiscopic pinnule of the proximal pinny with basal basiscopic pinnulette shorter than the adjacent pinnulette versus sessile basal basiscopic pinnule of the proximal pinny with basal basiscopic pinnulette more or less equal in length to the adjacent pinnulette. So what is that? What does all that mean? That's basically like, is 9 the same length as 11 or not? So, so a picture. All right. So the PDF floras are available. You can get them for the whole region or you can get them by state. So you can download one for Florida. They are free. We do ask for a donation if you wish to make one to support the work. But anyone can download them regardless of their income. The web app or website looks sort of like this. So it has the descriptive information, habitat, geography, the map for the Southeast, synonymy, endemic status. You can click from it to the genus or down to any subspecies. You can click the show in key button to see it in the key. You can see lots of good pictures of it. This is if you entered in COVE, it would give you all the genera that begin with CO and species that begin with VE. So you can search in some fairly simple ways. And the keys. Okay, and so I'm going to finish by telling you about the new FloraQuest app. So these we've been just developing for the last couple of years. And this is what the Florida one will be available in a few months. So you have an option of using dichotomous keys or the graphic polyclave flexible entry keys for ID. There are 2 to 5 photos per species illustrating important features. The dichotomous keys are increasingly being put in with embedded images. The traditional information like habitats, maps of distribution, native, non-native, are all there. There's a clickable illustrated glossary that are hyperlinked in the app. So you can, if you do find one of those Latinate terms like molecular in our key, it will also be defined. And there's less traditional information like photos and the wetland and conservation kinds of status that I was mentioning before. All this is developed from this graphic key. Why is that? Don't show again. Is developed from this, database of a lot of data. The app, when you open it up, has different sections: a map of the region, great places to botanize, acknowledgements, flower basics, leaf basics, glossary, bibliography, maps, and so forth. The great places to botanize section is really popular. So an amateur can find, publicly accessible places that aren't delicate and would be bad for lots of people to go to visit and learn, the diversity of habitats in their area and species in their area. You can configure the app from within it to a particular area. In Florida, it will be 4 areas: Panhandle, Northeast Florida, Central Peninsula, and Southern Peninsula. Those 4 areas have been used in a lot of previous Florida floristic kind of work. So you can basically set the app to include all of Florida or just one of those regions if you're only working in that region, and then all the other species will be excluded. One tricky point is you have to remember that you've done that when you then go somewhere else, right? You can set also by scientific name or common name so that it sorts things in, one way or the other. These are just some of the glossary and leaf basics and flower basics kind of portions. The map, the key, there's a pop-up ruler that is scaled to your device. It comes up with real millimeters and centimeters, not something bogus based on that you have a larger phone or a smaller phone. The keys themselves are clickable. You know, you basically click on something to jump to the next lead, but you can also show all of the couplets if you want to. There are, you know, as I mentioned, the glossary will come up if you click on it. So I'm not going to go through another example of using the graphic key. When it gets you down to a set of like 6 possibilities, you can set how these are listed. These are actually listed in order of commonness. So the more common things come out at the top, and the less common, that's this dark green, light green, yellow, and red or orange scaling is common, less common, uncommon, rare, and all. So the more likely things will come out at the top of the list. And if you press this identify further with our instant key, it'll create an on-the-fly key to just that set of 6 species remaining. So essentially a decision tree to help you answer the question of which of those 6 is it likely to be. So we came up with that it was, here's the instant key. We came up that it was Staphylia on the right. We look at the pictures and look at the description. It also provides you, this is sort of the breadcrumbs of how you could get here, the characteristics. And if you click on any of these, it gives you the not just the icon, but the information that the icon is based on and all. So I would just like to close with the idea that in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. We are doing all this in hopes to get better information out there to a broader set of people, not just PhD botanists, but interested folks who will then support a conservation agenda into the future. And I'll just close with this. So what would you like to see in your flora? Email me. This has the NCBG, North Carolina Botanical Garden website. You can access all of this, but you know, where you can download the floras, etc. The installable apps, of course, like any app on your phone, have to be purchased through Google Play or the App Store. They're $19.99, pretty expensive for an app. Really cheap compared to most floras and all. And there is a Facebook group, Weakley's Flora of the Southeastern United States, with I think now about 6,000 members. We update information about what we're up to on the apps and developments in the flora. This genus just got split, kind of announcements, etc. as well. And if you're able to and want to and find it valuable, provide support to the project. So thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions.